Hey everybody, it's time again to recap the latest news from the solar PV industry, compiled by the American Solar Energy Society. I'm Jay Warmke with SolarPVTraining.com, and this is what's happening in the magical world of solar for the week of March 16th. The EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, has terminated grant agreements in the total of $20 billion that were issued under the Biden administration to form a green bank program, which was designed to finance clean energy and climate-friendly projects. The idea was to create a nationwide version of government-backed and nonprofit green banks that are currently operating in 17 states. The law gave the EPA $27 billion to grant to states, tribes, nonprofit groups, and public-private consortiums. Those grantees, in turn, can lend or grant funds to projects or initiatives across the country while bringing in private sector lenders or financial backers to try and multiply the effects of this money. In April of 2024, the EPA picked 8 coalitions to receive the funds. In order to receive funding from the Green Bank, the project must comply with the Build America, Buy America Act, which requires that certain federally funded projects must use steel, iron, manufactured products, as well as construction materials that are made in the United States. The projects must also follow very complicated data reporting requirements. Their loans and investments must simultaneously reach hard-to-serve populations and earn returns that can be reinvested for future projects, all at the same time attracting private sector investors to contribute funds to the projects as well. As a result, even though the money was obligated last year, very little of it has been spent on projects to date. The termination of the agreements comes weeks after the EPA froze the grants, which EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin has claimed are marred by conflicts of interest as well as potential fraud. Defenders of the program argue that the money was awarded and the government entered into legal contracts with the organizations charged for administering these funds, and that no evidence of fraud or abuse has been demonstrated by the EPA. They claim that the action by the Trump administration is simply a breach of contract. The move, of course, is being appealed. If you're confused about what the ongoing federal budget negotiations or resolution will mean to future renewable energy tax credits, well, you're not alone. The 2022 Inflation Reduction Act established a base tax credit for renewable energy projects of 30%, meaning that homeowners or developers can deduct 30% of the cost of solar project from their tax bill. Additionally, commercial developers can deduct another 10% if their project is located in a low-income or an energy community. Energy community is basically one that's historically dependent upon fossil fuels for much of their employment. And there's an additional 10% credit if the project utilizes domestically manufactured products. The tax credits were set to remain in place through 2032, but many Republican lawmakers have targeted these tax credits, claiming that they will reduce tax revenues by as much as $1 trillion over the next 10 years. They want to use those revenues to offset the cost of expanding provisions of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is projected to reduce tax revenues by about $4 trillion over that same period of time. Now, the narrative here got a bit more complicated last week when 21 GOP representatives came out publicly to oppose the wholesale repeals of these Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. Tax credits are quite popular with Democrats as well as Republicans. A study of the effects of the IRA by consulting group E2 found that Republican districts have benefited substantially from the tax credits. Based on their findings, nearly 60% of all of the announced projects, representing 85% of all the investments and 68% of jobs, are in Republican congressional districts. A poll late last year found that 87% of Americans support federal incentives to deploy renewable energy, including 78% of 2020 Trump voters. A study by the British Trust for Ornithology looked at the impact of solar development on local bird populations. They found that the solar farms resulted in a greater number of bird species and more birds overall than surrounding cropland. According to the study, the number of species on mixed habitat solar farms were about 2.5 times higher than nearby farmland. The study also showed that solar farms offer important habitat for a number of threatened bird species. The mixed habitat solar farms surveyed contain many of the landscape features that birds prefer. These features include hedgerows, as well as tall and diverse vegetation that's around the solar panels that provide cover, nesting sites, as well as food sources. And that is the news from the solar industry for this week. We'll see you next week.